Folks, welcome back to So Bad It's Good, presented by Betches Media. I couldn't be more excited to talk to our guest today. Vanderpump Rules is over for the season, folks. Summer House is over for the season. We need to find new amazing things to watch, and I found one. I was just on Jeff Lewis's show on Sirius this past week, and I recommended this because I got so involved, and I love things that just pull you in. And this filmmaker that we have with us today, he pulls you in. This is a documentary, but the form in which he makes it work is like lyrical poetry. It's like lyrical realism. There is something so beautiful that sucks you in. The New York Times recently called Faire, which we're talking about today, almost like Succession in a sense, which I thought was very fitting. But the cast of characters, it is so out of this world that you think this is a written piece, but it is a documentary. Will have gone over the log line, Lance, of this, or I'll put this in right here. But without further ado, we get to talk to our director today. Not only did he direct Sperm World, which was on Hulu and is fantastic, he has now directed this 3-part docuseries or docu-fantasia on HBO, the one, the only, Lance Oppenheim. Thank you so much for being here, Lance.
Thanks for having me. This is fun.
I have not been able to stop thinking about this world that you highlighted since I watched this. In fact, I rewatched it today, and I guess it's a good sign when you get really sad after something's over. Do you get sad after you finish a project like this?
Oh, I mean, 100%. I mean, I generally try to be a happy guy, in my life, but I find it difficult to especially when something's done. I mean, I spent 3 years working on this thing, and I really, I spent more time with the people in the series and with the crew that I made the series with than my own family for 3.5 years almost. So it's a weird feeling, but I'm happy in some ways. It's over. I think it was emotional, to say the least, to be there for that long.
Well, the world has this now, and has it been really interesting to see our reactions to this piece?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, it's interesting. Look, the thing that I always sort of was thinking about with this was how, at what point will people be able to hopefully relate to this story? Ultimately, it's not, yes, there's a specificity to it. It's all real, and it happens to be set at a Renaissance fair. But really, the story to me is much bigger than that. And it's really about, almost like the American Empire in decline. It's about like the gerontocracy that King George has created for himself, and it's like a fantasy that he entombs everyone around him inside of, which is this quest for power and almost what this absolute power can do to a person. So I think seeing those themes make its way to other people and for people who have worked in small businesses before, or have had experiences with someone that is similar in some ways to George's managerial style. I think it's been great to see how cathartic, I guess, in some ways the series can be to a person that kind of has some familiarity with that vibe.
I mean, when you are going out there for the first time, have you made up your mind yet that you want to focus on this, or do you just put like lines out there in the water and see if something bites? And did you go there and visit and go, this is biting big time? Or did you know going in, I think I'm going to do this regardless of what I find today?
Well, I mean, no. And the irony is, when this first came around, I was really skeptical of just, it seemed too good to be true, really. There was a journalist named David Govey Herbert who co-created the series with me, and his story researcher, Abigail Rowe, they discovered that there was a man who created the largest Renaissance fair in the country, and it became so big that he incorporated his city around the fair. And in doing so, he almost became like a self-made king, and he controlled this fiefdom of people. And because it's Texas and things are pretty lax, to say the least, out there, he could basically do whatever he wanted. And so that was really interesting to me. And I had read a little bit about, and I think the Houston Chronicle and the Texas Monthly had done profiles of George in the past. So I had done some digging, and I just thought, this would be amazing if we could get to him. But I really thought this was all going to be like a funny story. I thought it was going to be a comedy at first, just this kind of, I don't know, like a kind of freewheeling riff on what a person's legacy could mean. But by the end of shooting it, the comedy turned into a tragedy. And I think it's sort of fitting, given the reality that happens there, but also the way in which everyone that lives there sort of sees their life, which is, uncannily kind of resembles King Lear in a way.
Oh my God. And the way when Jeff is bringing that up, like Jeff brings up King Lear and,
Yes,
I mean, oh my God. And like, listen, I know I'm not the only one. Like I was tearing up when he was singing from Shrek the Musical, and he's like an entrance point into this, even though you do sympathize with King George, you do sympathize with the sense of Darla, and all of these characters to a degree. But Jeff is such an entrance point, because I got sad so many times watching his journey, and I was almost thankful your cameras were there, because I almost was thinking that it protected him in a sense, or it gave him a purpose.
Well, no, thank you for saying that. I do think that is true, and I think ultimately what you get out of the story by the end is that it's not, the question of who's going to be king kind of proves itself to be sort of a flimsy question. It's sort of this a dangled carrot that is in front of everyone's faces. Really what this show ends up becoming about is like the destruction, spiritual, physical, emotional, the wasteland that exists in that George likes to create for people that want to be like him or want to be in his position. And so I think because this cycle of pain has existed so many times before with players that aren't even in this series, George has flirted many times with other general managers and put them in his will. Just in order, a few days later, he'd fire them. And so I think there is this feeling that all the players, from Darla to Louis to Jeff to Brandy, and then even to George, that I think everyone was excited in a weird way to have us there. I think for Jeff, Louis, Darla, it ended up becoming a fairly therapeutic experience to just unpack what they were going through, and to have someone there that could remind them that this is abnormal, that this is not like a normal thing they probably are experiencing, because for years they'd go through this without having someone to affirm them that this is, stranger than fiction, or just the quality that they'd have to experience was different. And for George, I think he was just, he wants to be an American icon, and he wants to be known for creating what he created. He wants to be seen and talked about, like and I do think there is a dimension to him that he reminds me of, like Howard Hughes at the end of his life.
Yes.
The
first episode, when you have him talking about his regimen to get to 95 years old, and I thought it was so fascinating, and you could tell that he really warmed up or loved the cameras or loved you, because he really showed himself, and you could tell he was a showman, but he was also the king of this whole thing. He was so open about wanting to find love, but also wanting a sexual partner. He, named his private parts. There are so many little details about George that I was blown away that he was so open about. What was your relationship personally with him? Was it hard to get his trust, or was that immediate?
It's interesting. It definitely took time to be able to get him excited about the process of doing this. I think in the initial phases of the production, I would print out sort of these long pages. He really likes lists. And I saw this with every person that he'd have a meeting with. So I would make lists. Abby and Abby Rowe and I would do this with Dave. We'd lay out for him, kind of a master plan of what the project was, what we were interested in, and how we were planning to do it. Initially, his patience would wear very thin. He doesn't like to stop. He likes to just do things. And so waiting around to get the microphone on him, or trying to set up certain shots to capture something that's real, but in this sort of contained, composed frame. Those were things that annoyed him. And I'd say probably in I probably about like 40 days into the production is when we hit a turning point with him. And I think he was feeling probably just a little bit bored and wanted to have someone around. And also, I think as I got to know him too, like he started to realize maybe that like what we were doing, we weren't just there to like, we weren't just journalists. You know, in my case, I don't see myself as a journalist. I see myself hopefully as an artist. Like I want to, my goal is to convert reality into cinema and still remain true to reality, but also you know, find creative ways to bring all of the bells and whistles of like a narrative film and all the techniques to get you closer to the setting or to the people in the series to kind of like create this other form of truth through that stuff. So I think like, you know, George never got so intellectual with me on that stuff, but I would always, you know, bring him images and like things that were inspiring me throughout the production. And I would talk about Howard Hughes and I talk about The Aviator, you know, the Scorsese movie, and I talk about these things with him. I even talked about There Will Be Blood, which I, you know, and John Wayne.
Oh my God, yes.
I would talk about these things and how I saw him, and I think he just was like, great, all right, good, yeah, okay, you can let, you know, like I kind of wore him down eventually, where he just would allow us to chill and film him as he'd go about his business.
Were the players involved concerned about how they were being presented? Not George, but would Jeff ask you about what was the shoot like with Darla? Was Louis trying to get in there? Would they try to get information with you? Because I would imagine you become, or maybe that's the tough part, is not becoming part of the story yourself.
100%. And honestly, that's where I think David Herbert and Abby Rowe, I think, you know, given that they are like investigative journalists in their own right, they were the ones that were able to help keep this on the tram lines. But, you know, for the most part, I would say like what I would always tell people, I would always be honest. If someone asked what was happening, how did one person feel about another person, they always really knew that, like, they knew that, like, in Jeff's case, Jeff knew Darla didn't like him. He knew Louis didn't like him. Louis and Darla both knew that I was filming a lot with Jeff. I think for each person, it was important to keep showing them footage throughout the process of making this thing, just to prove to them that, you know, I wasn't betraying their trust. Like, I would always tell them, you know, I would be very upfront, even in the most like uncomfortable situations. I tell them, like, this is the reason why I need to film this, and this is how I want to film it, and this is how I think it's going to function editorially. And then the next time I'd see them, I'd have like a kind of rough cut of that idea, and I would show it to them to basically, you know, tell them, you know, when you end up seeing the final cut of this, there's not going to really be any big surprises. You're going to know exactly what we filmed all together. Yeah. And so in a way, it's sort of like, you know, trying to treat the people that are in this with respect, honor the sort of kind of unspoken agreement that we have with each other. Like, they don't have editorial control, but just because they don't have editorial control doesn't mean that, you know, they're like lab rats that I'm extracting things from. What I like to do is much more collaborative. And again, I think going back to like Abbas Kiarostami, who made Close Up, I feel like, you know, you see, like, the reason I brought up Vanderpump Rules is, like, I feel like there are versions of truth in the performances people give in that show, even in most reality TV, in a way. And so I'm trying to kind of take like things that I loved from Iranian cinema and bring it into this sort of very poppy universe of people that are classical theatrical performers that are paid in their everyday lives to be reenactors, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's what I was trying to explain to my friends or people that I recommend this to. And I wonder sometimes if people, they genuinely get confused if what they're watching is real, because there is this cinematic element to everything that you do. And there's these shots that like break you. You have a shot with Jeff in the third episode after, you know, whatever happens at the Renaissance Fair, and he's just sitting there on the bench at his property. And then you see him talk about his weight loss, and it's a shot of him standing in the distance with the dog. And you're just like, oh God, this adds so much. Like, just with that one shot, you see everything. You see, you know, what his last couple of months have been like. But it's really interesting because it's a different kind of documentary format that a lot of people are used to. But I am so here for it. How long, I mean, and how much is your your form developing project after project. Like, you are not at your finished form, obviously, because you're always going to be growing and learning, but you really are hitting some really new keys here. Is that hard to stretch that muscle with an audience that expects a certain type of documentary?
Well, that's a great question, because I'm asking myself that all the time. I mean, to me, it's always like, what is the truth of the story that I'm trying to express? And I never, even in this series, like, there's in the first episode when Jeff goes to Germany and there's this phone call that happens and he has this sort of ego death. Like, we missed parts of that phone call, but that phone call happened, and the expression and the paranoia and the feelings of betrayal that he experienced were real. And so I thought, hey, rather than you just sitting in an interview frame and telling me how you feel and what happened, why don't we film something that more or less speaks to what exactly happened? And if you watch it back after you've seen it, maybe once, there is something going on in his performance that is so interesting and strange. It's almost this performance of pain. And I think that's really ends up being like the linchpin for the whole series, is that all of these people, there's this, the fantasy and the magic of the world keeps them playing this game really forever. But it's something that also is extremely humiliating and just damaging and destructive psychologically. So I think there was this, like, because there was this whimsy, and I was trying to take the magic of the Faire and iconography and not just like let people wallow and sit inside the feelings of despair they'd have, but I was asking them to kind of collaborate with me and play and let's represent these things in almost this theatrical, heightened way. People were into it. I think for this project specifically, though, because it probably has had the largest like launching pad, and HBO gave us like the Sunday night slot or whatever, that's usually reserved for their like marquee titles.
Yeah,
I think it's been interesting. I think a lot of people like I'm happy that people are having the conversation that even though there is reenactments and there is this sort of magical, fantastical these interventions in the series, it's still it doesn't make it any less real than any other documentary.
That's what I want to also like. It's beautiful to watch, but it hits you at every emotional level. Like, even George's story, even Darla's story, even you do empathize and sympathize, and there's so much humor in it and pathos. And Jeff's partner, when he's writing a letter to George to get back on the staff in the third episode, she's like, I'd take out that last part because it's almost groveling or begging to get back on. Your heart dies a little bit for Jeff because you realize so badly that he wants to be part of the Renaissance Festival. This is his life. And there is something so death of a salesman in that for me to watch that journey. I was reading the Vanity Fair article that came out for this, and Darla, this is why I wish this story was continuing, because Darla's like, well, Jeff's pandering to the audience. He's an actor. That's what he does. And I was like, how perfect for Darla to say that. I was like, this feels like an episode right now. Does it make you laugh to sometimes hear the documentary subjects talk about this after the fact, because they don't quit being real people?
Yeah, 100%. I'm very happy that and relieved that they all feel represented. That the story represented them faithfully, and I think them sharing their opinions of how they feel about the whole show and just their whole experience. I think there's so much more that they can say about it. So I love to hear what they say. And I think for Darla, her comment about Jeff, I laughed when I read it. And I think in some cases, like, the thing that's just so wild and I think ultimately pretty deep about this whole project is it's not a result of, my crew or me. It's that this is a cycle that continues to play out even right now. And like, just as of like 2 days ago, Jeff, he was called into George's office, and George watched, the whole show, and George told him how much he loved the show, and he gave him his old job back. And so now Jeff is the new general manager of the Faire, and George is sending him on to India to go to a convention. And of course, while this is all happening, I think Louis, I just talked with him. it sounds like the exact same thing that happened in the series. It's like, while Jeff is going to be in India, Louis going to come in and try and buy the festival from George, and it's just all going to happen again and again
Yeah.
and again and again.
It's Groundhog's Day. Yeah.
Yeah, there's something that's
Is there
so like absurd and funny and extremely tragic and ultimately dark, I think, about just the fact that that is what it is, you know?
is there a part of you as a documentarian and an artist that kills you that you can't be in India? That you know these stories continue, but you do not have access to your camera and your editing to actually be able to share this? Or are you a person that it's like, I've told the story I wanted to tell, and now I am on to one or two or three of my next projects that need my focus?
Yeah, I mean, it's always a little bit of both, you know? I mean, I loved making this project so much, and I love each person that is featured in it. Yeah, and I even have love for George. You know, I really enjoyed the experience of making it. And but I also feel like that, you know, I feel like the story in some ways is complete. You know, it starts with George asking that question, like, what is a king without his kingdom? He's free. And then by the end, he asks the same question, what is a king without his kingdom? And his answer is he's nothing. And I feel like, you know, maybe there's another story to tell once George is no longer alive. And I think there's a whole other dimension of like, what happens to this festival? Can it be run democratically? Does it need like a monarch? Does it need like someone to be George? What is that person going to do? You know, they aren't George, right? So how do they square themselves up with the legacy and the fate and just the kind of cruelty and all the complicated feelings they probably have about George? But that's not happening yet. And, you know, I'm kind of content to just, move on to the next thing and see where things happen. But the thing that's crazy is that George and Louis and Darla and Jeff, like everyone, the invitation is open to make another one with them if HBO was interested. And
that's what I was wondering too, is that, like you said, this story continues. There could be a second season, a third season where we see the same cycle play out. How much of your style or how much of this, you know, the storylines potentially, or you see what footage you get, how much of this is made also in editing? Because, you know, your editors or you, I mean, there is so much that goes into this and it really is different in just such an artistic manner. How much would you say, all the finished product is editing for this?
I mean, look, I think, you know, with a documentary, everything is written, really, right? Like, it's not written while we're shooting it. It's discovered. These are all moments that we have to sort of bear witness to. And then we collect them and we figure out what to do with them. But Max Allman and Nicholas Nasmi, who edited this project, they were the ones that really, I think, especially just in the sense of like, how do I shrink down the universe, but also show people the scope and the feeling and the, you know, just how lavish this whole thing is. But then also, how do we shrink it down to these, you know, really intensely emotional stakes for each person? That was something that I struggled with for so long, and they really taught me how to tell the story. But in terms of like things being like manufactured in the edit, there isn't. I mean, like in the first episode, the reenactments of the phone call and the sort of you know, the ego death. I mean, it's a mixture of things. It's sort of like, okay, we filmed this thing intentionally with Jeff. We need to do some pickups with Lauren so she can, you know, kind of almost reenact the thing that she had said to him on the phone that one time. And, you know, or in the second episode, it's sort of like we have this moment of, you know, here are things that Jeff is saying. Jeff is saying, I need to talk to George. I'm running out of time. But it feels too dry. Like, it's not very interesting to just see that. So why don't we like find a way to, again, bring the whimsy, the absurdism, the magic of the Faire and express those same ideas, the same lines even that Jeff was saying in a different place. So I would say like everything, you know, I mean, they are like Max and Nick, they are like the co-authors of this project. And, you know, really the other person, Ronald Bronstein, who works at it with Josh Safdie and Benny Safdie, he edited Uncut Gems. He wrote Uncut Gems. He edited Good Time. He wrote Good Time.
Jeez.
Is what, you know, like this guy was really, Ronnie was so deeply inside of the process with us. It almost felt like we had a a third editor or just kind of someone who could push it along. He's a tough critic and a really just amazingly generous collaborator. The second and third episode, I think the third one, the thing I'll say about it is it's the magic is gone. And once Jeff is fired, it was important to us to sort of let things sort of slow down a little bit and kind of just, like the filmmaking style shifts from being something that is as subjective to the experiences of the characters to something that's a bit more removed and objective and kind of probing. Like there's a lot more use of we changed the lenses we're shooting with. There's a lot more use of the of sort of static zooms rather than like steady cam or handheld camera work where it's the freneticism. It's a lot darker, and I think I just felt like we had to sort of formally match the feeling that Jeff experienced when he was laid off, or not laid off, when he was cruelly fired.
Well, and the same thing also I would say goes hand in hand with sound design. The sound design in this is so beautiful and next level. It is just, that's what I'm saying. I hate to point out things like editing and sound because it almost makes it like I'm noticing when it's all just kind of one thing that washes over you. But when you go back and watch it a second time, you realize how much stuff went into this. The sound design is right there leading you along the way and complementing everything. And that's how excited I am about this, that I was like, God, this is just beautiful, just wonderful. What was the decision like when Jeff did get cruelly fired? We just hear the audio and you have focus of the artwork all over George's place, I believe. And we're just hearing the audio. And I just thought, what an amazing decision. Where did that come from?
Well, just before I answer that, the sound, that one thing on the sound design, my operator, my sound mixer who was in the field with me, Jack Sobo. And then I had an amazing supervising sound editor named Paul Shu, who does like all of Spike Lee's movies and Ari Aster's movies. The two of them worked together to basically just create this like crazy sonic soundscape for this that I think again, leans into the absurdism of the world, but then also like you're bringing up in this, the firing scene can sort of shrink itself back down. And by the end of this, it's sort of like the series becomes a lot less bouncy, and it becomes a lot, it almost becomes like haunted. It's like, I was also thinking a lot about this Robert Altman movie. Oh my God. It was his the Robert Altman movie. I think it's called Secret Honor. That was what it was.
In the 70s?
No, this is, I
80s?
think it's from the 80s with Philip Baker Hall, who plays Richard Nixon, and he's kind of just paranoid and ambling around the White House, and you're sort of in his head. I was thinking a lot about that. But for the firing scene, it was really, to me, it was I knew that morning that something bad was going to happen. And I remember talking to George and just basically being as careful as possible. I told him like we wanted to film on the property, but we didn't want to get in the way of anything. And he basically mentioned that he was going to do something big. And so we couldn't really be in the room, but we were able to record the sound, and I was filming. The camera was literally outside, and it was literally in the camera was pointed at the window. And I was just listening, and I remember just thinking like, holy fuck, this is just unbelievable. And I in a way, I was initially, I was disappointed we couldn't be in the room, but then I was really, in some ways, really, it was kind of a revelation to me that, this sort of shitty audio, and the rawness of it. It's one of the only moments in the whole series where like we're not presenting this in this fantastical way. It's real. It's a reminder to the audience that what they are watching, even though there are these flights of fantasy and stuff, it is a real person's life, and this is a real moment that happened to somebody. And after that all happened, I went to George's chapel. And, I found all those murals that are up there that all felt like they were sort of almost illustrative of the kinds of things,
the faces
on there. Yeah.
That was really powerful. I know we're almost out of time here. But I would just want to remind the audience that you do need to try new things, and this should be one of them. This is going to be, like I said, I am so bummed this was only 3 episodes. I went in not knowing it was 3 episodes. So I watched the final episode going, what's next week? And then realizing, oh God, it's over. And I was so sad. And that's why I said, is there any possible way I could talk to Lance Oppenheim? And I'm so thankful to be able to talk to him. We barely scratched the surface, folks, because this has it all. Like I said, this is artistic, but it's also a true document of real people, real feelings, real emotions, characters that you will not believe, but you will recognize. I haven't stopped listening to Enya since I had that episode of him playing Enya. I was like, I got to go back and listen to Orinoco Flow again. But what do you hope, I guess, that audiences, and this is such a basic question, but to end with, like, what do you hope we take away from this project in particular?
Well, to me, I feel like we're living in a weird time right now where I feel like most of the people that lead in the institutions, that come to kind of form the fabric of our country are very similar to George, both in age and in temperament. And I think in probably competency. I think there's something interesting about both potential next presidents of the United States being the 2 oldest candidates that we've probably ever had, if I'm not mistaken. And I think you see this also in so many other small businesses around America. You see it even in large businesses around America, like Disney, like SNL, I mean,
institutions.
Most institutions have this issue of the magic men of the past who helped probably shape, the company, the corporation, the fabric of the thing that they were the ones who shaped the culture of the place, and they are having trouble letting go of it. And I think it's a very scary thing. It's a scary thing for younger people, I think, to even just consider that maybe after devoting a life to something, they'll just always sort of be worker bees and not the leader. And so I guess I hope that this whole show, if you take anything away from it, it almost is like a cautionary tale, but I hope it also wakes people up. And it becomes sort of this instructional thing for when we go through what we're about to go through in the next, 4 years in America. Well, there's sort of we kind of know what's going to happen already. And this is living proof of it. It's almost like this portrait of like the American empire in decline. And so,
hot damn. You couldn't have said that. You couldn't have said it better if you tried. Also, Lance, I am petitioning for you to direct an episode of Vanderpump Rules next season. Would love to see what you would do with Tom Sandoval. But honestly, Lance Oppenheim, it is truly an honor to speak to you. Also, Some Kind of Heaven, another killer, a banger of a documentary. But thank you. What are you doing this weekend? You doing anything fun?
I'm filming a dog food commercial, so it's I feel honored and fortunate to be able to do this and make a living, and but I'm here in Ohio right now, so I'm gonna do that, and then I'm gonna go home and I'm gonna take a bath and I'm gonna smoke a joint probably.
You guys, Ren Faire, you can stream all 3 episodes right now. Lance Oppenheim, thank you so much for taking the time with us today.
Thank you. This was a pleasure. Thanks.